11:40 p.m. Total darkness over the Philippine Islands. 12 Japanese bombers are heading toward 20,000 sleeping American soldiers. If those bombers reach their targets, hundreds of Americans will die before sunrise. One American pilot is about to hunt them all, alone, in complete darkness, without ever seeing his targets until the final seconds. In the next 80 minutes, 4 Japanese bombers will vanish from the sky. Their crews will never know what killed them. They will never see the aircraft that destroyed them. They will simply cease to exist. The Japanese High Command will refuse to believe one aircraft did this. They will assume an entire American squadron ambushed their bomber formation. They will search for evidence of multiple attackers. They will find nothing, because there was only one. One plane, one pilot, one radar operator. 4 kills in 80 minutes. This is the story of the deadliest night fighter mission in Pacific history. A mission so successful that it changed how America fought in the darkness forever. Welcome to History of World War II. We uncover the forgotten heroes who changed the course of the war. Stories the textbooks never tell. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Now let me show you exactly how one man hunted invisible enemies in total darkness and saved 20,000 lives. Major Carroll Smith sat in the cramped cockpit of his P-61 Black Widow at Mangaldan Field on the island of Mindoro, watching his radar operator track multiple contacts moving through the black Philippine sky. Smith was 26 years old. He had flown 43 combat missions. He had 4 confirmed kills to his name. He was one of the most experienced night fighter pilots in the Pacific theater. But tonight would test everything he had ever learned about aerial combat. The Japanese had been sending bombers to destroy American airfields every single night for 2 straight weeks. 334 air raid alerts in 14 days. That is an average of 24 alerts every single day. The men on the ground had not slept properly in weeks. American engineers were building to critical runways to support the upcoming Lingayen Gulf invasion. Those airfields were essential to the entire Pacific strategy. If American fighters could operate from Mindoro, they could provide air cover for the entire invasion force. They could protect the landing ships. They could keep Japanese aircraft away from the beaches. The Japanese understood exactly what those airfields meant. They knew that completed runways on Mindoro would give Americans air superiority over the entire Philippine archipelago. They had to stop construction at any cost. So they sent bombers every night. Conventional bombers, kamikazes, anything that could carry explosives. Night after night after night. Smith's squadron, the 418th Night Fighter Squadron, had arrived at Mindoro just 3 days earlier on December 26th. They were the only thing standing between those Japanese bombers and 20,000 American troops sleeping in tents below. The pressure was absolutely suffocating. Every bomber that got through meant dead engineers, dead construction crews, damaged equipment, delayed airfields, late invasion, more American casualties on the beaches of Lingayen Gulf. Smith carried all of that weight on his shoulders as he sat in his cockpit, waiting for the order to take off. Here is the mathematical problem Smith faced that night. 12 Japanese bombers were coming. His fuel tanks held 646 gallons. At combat power settings, that fuel would last maybe 3 hours. If he spent 10 minutes engaging each target, he could only intercept 3 or 4 bombers before he had to return to base for fuel. That meant 8 or 9 bombers would slip through to hit the airfields. 8 or 9 bombers meant hundreds of casualties. Maybe thousands if they hit the fuel storage dumps or the ammunition depots. The mathematics were brutal. One aircraft simply could not stop 12 bombers. It was physically impossible. Or so everyone believed. Quick question for you. If you were flying alone against 12 enemy bombers with fuel for only 3 hours, what would your strategy be? Would you play it safe and intercept 2 or 3, then return to base? Or would you risk everything, including your own life, to stop as many as possible? Think about that choice as Smith makes his decision. Smith had something the Japanese did not know existed. A secret weapon that would change everything about this night. The P-61 Black Widow was the first American aircraft ever designed specifically for night combat. It was not a modified day fighter. It was not a converted bomber. It was built from the ground up to hunt enemies in total darkness. The aircraft was massive by fighter standards, 66 feet wingspan. Twin Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines producing 2,000 horsepower each, 4,000 horsepower total. Top speed 366 miles per hour. The Black Widow carried 4 20mm Hispano M2 cannons mounted in the belly of the aircraft. Each cannon held 200 rounds, 800 rounds total. Enough firepower to destroy multiple bombers in a single mission. But the cannons were not the Black Widow's true weapon. The real weapon was invisible. It was the SCR-720 radar system mounted in the nose of the aircraft. The radar used a rotating parabolic dish that sent out microwave pulses in a 180-degree arc forward of the aircraft. When those pulses hit another aircraft, they bounced back. The radar receiver detected those returns and displayed them as glowing blips on a cathode ray tube screen. The SCR-720 could detect enemy aircraft up to 5 miles away in complete darkness. It could track multiple targets simultaneously. It could guide the pilot to within visual range of targets he could never have found otherwise. The Japanese had absolutely no idea this technology existed. Their bombers flew at night because they believed darkness made them invisible. They believed that American fighters could not find them without visual contact. They believed that the black Philippine sky would protect them from interception. They were catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Philip Porter was Smith's radar operator. He sat behind Smith in a separate compartment, completely focused on the glowing radar scope in front of him. Porter had been tracking targets for 6 months. He knew how to read the scope. He knew how to interpret the returns. He knew how to guide Smith toward contacts with precise verbal instructions. At 11:42 p.m., Porter's voice crackled through the intercom with information that made Smith's heart rate spike. 4 separate contacts on the scope, all heading south toward Mindoro. All at different altitudes, all approaching the American airfields. Smith made his decision instantly. He was going to intercept all 4 bombers, not 1, not 2, all 4, even if the mathematics said it was impossible. Smith pushed the throttles forward. The twin R-2800 engines responded instantly with a surge of power that pressed him back into his seat. The Black Widow climbed at 2,000 feet per minute. The altimeter needle spun upward. Porter called out vectors. Heading 035. Altitude 8,000 feet. Range for miles. Target speed 180 knots. Smith could not see anything through the canopy. No moon, no stars. Heavy clouds obscured everything. The darkness was so complete that Smith could not see his own wingtips. This was exactly why the Japanese had chosen tonight for their attack. Complete darkness meant their bombers should have been invisible to any pursuing fighter aircraft. Should have been. If you are already gripped by this story, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and helps more people discover these forgotten heroes of World War II. The first target was a Mitsubishi G4M. The Americans called it Betty. It was Japan's primary land-based bomber. 2,000 horsepower from twin Mitsubishi Kosei engines. Maximum speed 270 miles per hour. Crew of 7 brave men. Bomb load of 1,760 pounds. The Betty had earned a deadly reputation among American pilots, but not for its offensive capabilities. The Betty had a critical design flaw. To maximize range, Japanese engineers had eliminated self-sealing fuel tanks. The aircraft carried thousands of gallons of aviation fuel in unprotected tanks throughout the wings and fuselage. One burst of cannon fire into those fuel tanks would turn the Betty into a fireball. American pilots called it the flying lighter. Japanese crews called it the flying coffin. Porter continued calling out range and bearing. 3 miles, 2 miles, 1.5 miles. Smith activated his own radar scope, smaller display integrated into his instrument panel. Once the target got close enough, Smith could track it himself without relying entirely on Porter's verbal instructions. Range 1 mile. Smith strained his eyes against the darkness. He could not see anything. It's blackness in every direction. At 500 yards, Smith finally saw it. It's a dark shape against slightly less dark clouds. The bomber's exhaust flames were barely visible. Faint orange glows from the engine nestles. That was all. 2 tiny orange dots in an ocean of black. The Betty crew had no idea Smith was behind them. Japanese bombers carried no tail warning radar. No way to detect a pursuing night fighter. They flew in darkness, believing they were completely safe. Smith maneuvered the Black Widow into attack position. Slightly below the bomber, slightly behind. The 4 20mm cannons were fixed forward in the lower fuselage. Smith had to aim the entire aircraft at the target. He used the N6 gun sight integrated into his instrument panel. The sight projected an illuminated reticle onto a combining glass. Smith adjusted his position until the bomber sat perfectly centered in the glowing crosshairs. Range 400 yards. 375. 350. Smith armed the cannons. His finger rested on the trigger. Night fighter doctrine called for short, concentrated bursts. Get close, fire. Confirm the kill. Move to the next target. Wasting ammunition on a single bomber meant fewer rounds for the remaining targets. Smith squeezed the trigger at 350 yards. The 4 cannons fired in unison. The sound was deafening, even through the engine noise. 20mm high explosive shells streamed toward the Betty at 2,800 feet per second. The tracers looked like red lines drawn across the darkness. Smith fired for exactly 2 seconds. 12 rounds per cannon. 48 shells total. The Betty's right wing exploded. Fuel ignited instantly. A massive fireball erupted in the darkness. The bomber rolled hard right and entered a steep, uncontrolled dive, trailing fire and smoke. Smith watched it fall. The burning aircraft illuminated the clouds below like a descending torch. It hit the water 8 miles north of Mindoro at 11:57 p.m. 1 bomber down, 11 remaining. But Smith checked his fuel gauge and felt a chill run through him. He had already burned through 15% of his fuel, just reaching and destroying the first target. And Porter's scope showed 3 more contacts still heading toward the airfields. Smith had 112 minutes of fuel remaining. 3 bombers to intercept. Miles of black sky between each target. The mathematics were still brutal, but Smith was going to try anyway. Here is a question I want you to consider. When you only have enough resources to accomplish some of your goals, how do you decide which ones to pursue? Do you focus on the easy victories? Or do you push for everything, knowing you might fail completely? Smith faced this exact calculation with lives hanging in the balance. Porter identified the second target at 12:14 a.m. on December 30th. Heading 180. Altitude 6,000 feet. Range 6 miles. The bomber was 23 miles from Smith's current position. Smith turned the Black Widow south and descended. The P-61 cruised at 280 miles per hour. That meant roughly 5 minutes to intercept the second bomber. 5 minutes the bomber spent flying closer to Mindoro, closer to the airfields, closer to completing its mission. Smith pushed the throttles forward. 320 miles per hour. The engines roared. The airframe vibrated. Fuel consumption increased dramatically at high power settings. Every minute, at maximum speed, cost Smith 3 minutes of patrol time. But if he did not intercept quickly, the bomber would reach the target zone. American anti-aircraft gunners would open fire. The sky would fill with tracers and explosions. The bomber might get shot down by ground fire, or it might release its bombs first. Either way, people would die. Porter called out corrections. left 5 degrees, down 2 degrees. Smith adjusted heading constantly. The second contact grew stronger on the radar scope. Range for miles: 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile. Smith spotted the second bomber at 1 mile range. Another Betty, same profile, same vulnerable fuel tanks, same crew of 7 men who did not know they had seconds to live. The bomber was flying lower than the first one, 6,000 feet instead of 8,000, closer to the cloud layer. That gave Smith less room to maneuver. The approach had to be perfect. Too fast and Smith would overshoot the target. Too slow and the bomber crew might spot the Black Widow's exhaust flames. Night fighters relied completely on surprise. Once the enemy knew you were there, everything changed. Bomber crews would take evasive action. Gunners would open fire. The clean intercept would turn into a chaotic dogfight. Smith positioned the P-61 below and behind the target. The bomber crew was flying straight and level. No evasive maneuvers. No indication they knew death was stalking them through the darkness. At 500 yards, Smith could see the Betty clearly, a dark shape against a dark sky. The bomber's wings were spread wide. The twin engines droned steadily. 7 men inside, trusting the night to protect them. Smith centered the target in his gun sight. Range 400 yards. 375. 350. He fired 2-second burst, 48 rounds. The 20mm shells tore through the Betty's fuselage. The right engine caught fire immediately. Then the left engine. Both wings were burning within seconds. Fuel streamed from ruptured tanks, feeding the flames. The bomber nosed over and dove toward the ocean. No parachutes emerged. The crew never had a chance to react. It hit the water at 12:19 a.m., 17 minutes after midnight. 2 bombers down, 10 remaining. Smith checked his fuel gauge. 42% remaining, still enough to continue hunting. Porter had 2 more contacts on his scope. Both were closer to Mindoro than the previous targets. Both were at different altitudes, one flying at 9,000 feet, one at 4,000 feet. They were 8 miles apart from each other. Smith had to choose which bomber to pursue first. The higher target meant climbing. Climbing used less fuel than rapid descent, but the higher target was also farther north. Pursuing it meant allowing the lower bomber to get 8 minutes closer to the airfields. The lower target was more immediate threat. But descending rapidly, then climbing again, would burn precious fuel. If Smith made the wrong choice, one bomber would get through. Bombs would fall on American positions. Men would die because of his decision. Smith made his choice in 3 seconds. He turned north and climbed. The P-61 reached 9,000 feet at 12:23 a.m. The third bomber was different from the first 2. Very different. It was a Nakajima, Key 49. Americans called it Helen. Faster than the Betty. Maximum speed 306 miles per hour. Better defensive armament. 5 7.7mm machine guns positioned throughout the aircraft, including a tail gunner with a clear field of fire directly behind the bomber. And this bomber was not flying straight and level. It was taking evasive action. Turning left, then right. Climbing 200 feet, then descending 300. Someone aboard that aircraft knew Americans had night fighters in the area. The pilot was experienced. He had survived previous missions. He understood that predictable flight paths made his aircraft an easy target. Random changes in heading and altitude made radar tracking extremely difficult. Porter compensated by watching the pattern, predicting movements, anticipating turns before they happened. He had done this dozens of times before. He knew how bomber pilots thought. Smith adjusted his approach. Attacking from directly behind would put him straight in the tail gunner's sights. Suicide against an alert crew. Instead, Smith came from below and to the left. The bomber's blind spot. Kuis. Most Japanese aircraft had poor ventral coverage. The belly was vulnerable. Range decreased. 1 mile, 800 yards. 700, 600. The Helen continued its evasive maneuvers. The pilot was good. He was making Smith's job as difficult as possible. 500 yards, 450, 400. At 375 yards, the tail gunner opened fire. Orange tracers streamed past Smith's canopy, close enough that he could see individual rounds flashing by. The gunner had somehow spotted the Black Widow against the dark sky. Maybe the exhaust glow. Maybe a silhouette against lighter clouds. The element of surprise was gone. Smith had seconds to take the shot before the pilot threw the bomber into aggressive, evasive action that would shake the P-61 off his tail. He squeezed the trigger. 3-second burst. 72 rounds. Longer than his previous attacks. Necessary because the Helen was maneuvering and he might not get another chance. The 20mm shells punched through the Helen's fuselage and right engine. The engine exploded in a ball of orange fire. The bomber rolled, inverted, and entered an uncontrolled spin. Debris flew off the aircraft. Smith pulled the Black Widow away to avoid wreckage. The burning Helen fell through 9,000 feet, 8,000, 6,000. 6,000. It hit the water at 12:29 a.m. 3 bombers down, 9 remaining. Smith checked his fuel gauge. 28%, critical level. If you want to see how this incredible mission ends and discover whether Smith survives what happens next, please subscribe to History of World War II and hit that notification bell. We bring you forgotten stories like this every week. Most pilots returned to base when fuel dropped to 30%. Below that level, any unexpected delay could be fatal. Getting lost, encountering headwinds, missing the airfield on first approach. Any of those problems could mean running out of fuel over open ocean. Running out of fuel at night over water meant certain death. No visual references, no horizon, no way to judge altitude. The aircraft would hit the water before the pilot even realized how low he was flying. But Porter had one more contact on his scope. The fourth target, heading 170. Altitude 4,000 feet. Range 9 miles. This was the bomber Smith had bypassed earlier, a one flying at low altitude. It was now only 12 miles from Mindoro. Close enough that Smith could see searchlight beams sweeping the sky over the American positions. Smith made his decision instantly. He was going after the fourth bomber. Fuel margins did not matter. The mission mattered. He descended toward the target. Diving conserved fuel. The Black Widow dropped through 8,000 feet. 7,000. 6,000. 5,000. Smith leveled off at 4,200 feet, slightly above the target altitude. He would dive on the bomber from above using gravity to increase his speed. Range decreased. 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile. Smith acquired the fourth target visually. Another Betty, flying straight toward Mindoro without any evasive maneuvers. The pilot either did not know American night fighters were hunting his formation, or he simply did not care. Japanese bomber crews often accepted death as the price of completing their mission. Honor demanded they press forward regardless of personal survival. Smith positioned the P-61 for the attack. Below and behind, range 400 yards, 375, 350. He checked his ammunition counter. 512 rounds remaining. Plenty of firepower. But his fuel gauge showed 23%. Below safety margins. If he engaged this bomber and missed, he would not have enough fuel to pursue it again. One chance, one burst. Then he had to return to base whether the bomber was destroyed or still flying. Smith fired at 12:34 a.m. 2-second burst. 48 rounds. The shells converged on the Betty's center fuselage. The port wing separated completely from the aircraft. Fuel tanks ruptured. Fire spread across everything that remained. The Betty rolled left and dove toward the ocean, trailing a column of fire visible for miles. It impacted at 12:35 a.m., 4 bombers destroyed in 55 minutes. Smith turned the Black Widow back toward Mindoro. His fuel gauge showed 21%. The airfield was 18 miles south. Simple mathematics. He would make it. Barely, Porter scanned his radar scope for additional contacts. Nothing. The remaining 8 Japanese bombers had turned back. Whether they had detected Smith's attacks or simply lost their nerve was impossible to know. The airfields were safe. 20,000 Americans would see sunrise. Construction crews would work through the night without bombs falling on them. But Smith's night was not over. At 12:42 a.m., Porter detected a new contact. Heading north toward Mindoro. Range for miles. Altitude 7,000 feet. This contact was between Smith and his base. If it was hostile, Smith could not ignore it. Engaging would consume precious fuel. Smith might not make it back to the airfield. But letting an enemy aircraft reach the positions he had just defended was unacceptable. Smith turned toward the contact without hesitation. Range closed rapidly. 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile. At 800 yards, Smith saw the target. It was not a bomber. It was a Nakajima Katy for Hayat. Americans called it Frank. A single-engine fighter aircraft. Maximum speed, 392 miles per hour. 4 heavy machine guns. 2 20mm cannons. The Frank was one of the best Japanese fighters in service. Faster than the P-61, more maneuverable, better rate of climb. In daylight, a skilled Frank pilot could defeat a Black Widow in single combat. But this was not daylight. The Frank pilot had no radar. He was flying completely blind, searching for American aircraft using visual references that did not exist in total darkness. Smith had the only advantage that mattered. He could see the enemy. The enemy could not see him. Smith positioned below and behind. Range 500 yards, 400. 300. His fuel gauge showed 17%. If he missed this shot, he would have to disengage immediately and hope he could reach the airfield. Smith centered the Frank in his gun sight. The fighter flew straight and level, completely unaware. He fired at 12:45 a.m. 3-second burst, 72 rounds. The shells tore through the Frank's tail section and engine cowling. The fighter's engine exploded. Flames erupted from the cowling. Black smoke poured backward. The Frank rolled right and dove. At 3,000 feet, the pilot ejected. Smith saw the parachute deploy. A white canopy against black sky. The Frank continued its dive and hit the water at 12:46 a.m. 5 kills, 1 mission. Fuel at 15%. Smith turned toward Mindoro. 11 miles to go. Maybe 22 minutes of fuel remaining. Then, at 12:52 a.m., everything fell apart. Smith was 3 miles from the runway. Altitude 800 feet. Airspeed 140 knots. He was configuring for landing approach. The runway lights went out. All 12 kerosene lamps extinguished simultaneously. Complete total darkness where the airfield should have been. Without runway lights, Smith had no visual reference for landing. He could not see where the ground was. The aircraft would crash before he realized how low he was flying. His fuel gauge showed 9%, 46 gallons, 8 minutes of flight time. Not enough to divert to another airfield. Tacloban on Leyte was 90 miles away. The Black Widow would run out of fuel 40 miles short. Smith had 2 options. Land at Mangaldan Field without lights or crash into the ocean and hope someone found him before he drowned. Porter suggested using the radar altimeter. The device measured exact height above ground by bouncing radio waves off the surface. Accurate to within 50 feet. Smith could descend slowly using the altimeter reading. When it showed 0 feet, he would theoretically be on the ground. The technique was incredibly dangerous. Any error in navigation meant landing in jungle or construction equipment or coral reefs. The runway was only 5,000 feet long. Missing it by even 100 yards meant death. Fuel at 7%. 5 minutes remaining. Smith turned toward where he believed the runway was located. His compass heading was 180. The runway ran north-south. If his navigation was accurate, the runway would be directly ahead. He descended to 400 feet, reduced airspeed to 120 knots. Extended landing gear. 3 green lights confirmed wheels down. The radar altimeter showed 380 feet. 300, 250. 200. Smith could not see anything below. No lights, no ground, no reference points, just instruments and hope. 150 feet. 175. Extended flaps to full. Airspeed dropped to 110 knots. Descent rate 400 feet per minute. 50 feet, 25. Smith reduced power and prepared for impact. The main wheels hit crushed coral at 12:59 a.m. The impact was harder than normal. Smith felt the jolt through the entire airframe. For a terrible second, he thought the landing gear would collapse. It held. The nose wheel touched down 3 seconds later. Smith applied brakes. The aircraft decelerated. 100 knots, 80, 60, 40, 20. The Black Widow stopped. Fuel gauge showed 6%. 3 minutes of fuel remaining. Ground crews arrived with flashlights. Smith had landed on the runway. Somehow his navigation had been perfect. The engines shut down at 1:03 a.m., 1 hour and 23 minutes after takeoff. Smith climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Not from fear, from total exhaustion. 5 intercepts. 5 kills. 1 blind landing. 63 minutes of combat. Intelligence officers confirmed all 5 kills. Ground radar had tracked every intercept. Coast watchers reported seeing aircraft crash into the ocean. Wreckage was visible at first light. 4 bombers. 1 fighter, exactly where Smith reported them. But Smith was not finished. December 30th, 1944, 2:30 p.m. 14 hours after landing in total darkness, Smith took off again. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft had been spotted over Mindoro. Single-engine fighters. Faster and more dangerous than bombers. At 3:12 p.m., Porter detected a contact. Altitude 12,000 feet. Range 8 miles. Another Katie for Frank. Smith climbed to intercept. He dove on the Frank from above, using altitude advantage to increase his speed to 390 miles per hour. He fired at 400 yards. 2-second burst, 48 rounds. The Frank's engine exploded. The fighter dove into the ocean. Smith's 7th kill. 7 confirmed victories in less than 24 hours. No other American night fighter pilot in any theater would ever match that record. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron continued operations from Mindoro through January 1945. The unit scored 18 total kills during the war. Smith's 7 kills accounted for 39% of his entire squadron's total score. The airfields he defended supported the Lingane Gulf invasion exactly as planned. American forces landed January 9, 1945. Fighters operating from Mindoro provided air cover for the landing beaches. Engineers estimated that Japanese bombs hitting the construction areas would have delayed completion by 2 weeks. 2 weeks meant delayed invasion. Delayed invasion meant more casualties. Smith saved thousands of lives in 80 minutes of combat. He survived the war. Returned to the United States in February 1946. Left the military. Became a civilian. Never sought publicity. Never wrote memoirs. Never claimed to be a hero. The only records of his achievement exist in military archives, unit histories, intelligence reports, after-action summaries. The P-61 Black Widow proved what night fighters could accomplish. 700 aircraft built, used in every theater. The aircraft dominated night combat from 1944 until the end of the war, for Black Widows still exist today in museums. None of them is Smith's aircraft. The specific P-61 that hunted for bombers in 80 minutes was scrapped after the war. The nose art, the kill markings. The aircraft that saved 20,000 lives, all lost to history. Here is my final question for you. Smith flew alone against impossible odds, knowing he could only intercept a few bombers. He risked his own life repeatedly to stop as many as possible. He landed blind when any sane pilot would have ejected. When have you faced a situation where the mathematics said you could not win, but you pushed forward anyway? Have you ever chosen mission over safety? I want to hear your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to History of World War II and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to know these heroes existed. The next video appearing on your screen reveals another forgotten pilot who changed the war in ways nobody expected. I will see you there.